Hello, welcome back to today's video. In our last video, we talked about workflows and I showed you how this can help to digitize your data process and make sure that the data is not redundant. As soon as it lands within your system, it's able to trigger an action. Now, today I'm going to be speaking to utility owners, mostly. You're a utility manager, you're a technician with a utility, and you want to improve as how fast your processes are. And let's look at one process. This is from service request. Let's say you have this very ambitious project and you want to extend services to a number of new communities or new customers. And they make a request for service, and then you have to go through your normal procedure. Let's assume the first thing you do is log in these customer details, yeah? And then do a verification to check whether the person's location, the land in which you're going to extend the service is in this person's name, and then you need to verify whether it's in your operational area, whether you have enough resources to extend to that particular place. A lot of things, yeah? And each of these particular tasks has different people performing different things at different times. How do you harmonize this in one place so that as an admin, as a manager, you're able to see and look at the process flow from the beginning to the end, yeah? That's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. How can I be able to enroll a customer from the time when they request for service to the point when the service has been established and we are coming to do the first meter reading for this water point? I'm excited. Are you? Let's dive in and see.
Now I'm going basically to share with you if, for instance, you are a utility and you have a system that is expanding and you've been able to build this within the mWater platform. How do you go from requests for service connections from customers to the point where you conduct a complete meter reading and record payments and etc. So our workflow is basically going to be designed in this particular structure. And like you can see, we have what we call the active steps, like those steps that get to a completion. And we have key roles that we are going to have in our particular workflow. So the vision here is that when a new customer wants to enroll or wants to have a service extended to their particular property, they can be able to apply through, let's say, an online application system. And here we have, let's say, a customer support individual who is able to record this particular information in form of a form. And then once this is completed, this can go through the next phase, which is the application intake. And this is where we verify the information from the customer and go through a loop and make sure that in case certain information is not complete within the application, this can move through back into the loop, and then we have this information refilled again. So after the application has been verified, what next? What happens is that we need to make sure that we conduct a technical inspection to make sure that the location is within our operational area, to make sure that we have the necessary budget estimations for how much it would cost to establish a new connection in that particular point. We can be able to schedule that as well at this next phase. And who most likely can perform this particular role? We can see that here we could assign, let's say, a field technician to perform this particular responsibility. So we assign this particular role to a technical inspection, and based on their report, we could say that this is feasible or this application is not feasible, and we can go ahead and reject it, and then it goes through a multiple cycle as well. So upon rejection, you can say probably it's based on wrong information, and you can loop this back to the cycle where we refill this information, or you can actually escalate it to, let's say, a supervisor or a technician that can do a second review. So after, let's say, we have gone through that particular process and an approval has happened, we go to the quotations. How much is required? What are the materials that are needed to do this particular extension? So this is where we now see other roles coming in. We can see a finance officer assigned to perform this particular role at that stage. Once the finance officer has approved and issued a quotation and approved that the customer has been able to make the payment, then they can be able to to escalate or send the workflow through the next stage, which is the installation of the particular let's say asset within that system. Now, however, here we can also still go back through the loop. Let's say the quotation has been made, but the customer hasn't been able to pay a given amount. So we can still be able to reject this application. When a successful application happens and the quotations are made and the payment has been done, then we can go through the installation phase. Then at this point, this is where now, let's say the technician does the installation and they verify that this task is now assigned to we can assign back this task to the customer support to be able to create an account within the mWater system for this particular new customer. So this is now where we go into the asset management feature, where we have the accounting features and then the meter reading features, etc. So in here, this is now where the customer support can go ahead and now create the account, link the asset to the account, and then associate it with given tariffs, associate it with given meter reading schedules that have been stated within the customer management features. For those that are new for this, we have material out on the platform that you can access and look at the customer management features and how it works. But occasionally we shall also release videos on how you can be able to do the customer management features. I think we have one on our YouTube channel that you can access. So in there, once that person who could be the customer support individual does that, they can now go ahead and move this particular process to the activation stage. And in the activation stage, this is where now a supervisor, whom we may call the utility manager, goes ahead to verify that the system has gone through all this process, and now we can go ahead to do the activation process. And then after the activation, we can now assign who is going to do the meter reading. And after a given period of time, we can see that the meter reading process goes through a loop, in that after every 30 days, it automatically alerts the field technician to go and conduct the meter reading process. Now, how does this look like in practice? This is what I'm going to present into details. So we built it with one entry point in this case, where we begin the service request workflow, and the customer service individual within the help desk or at office can be able to receive maybe request for service through, let's say, request submission form, or it could be a phone call from a customer, and this particular person can now start the workflow. And the workflow starts through step 1, which is the online application form. This is a mini form that has been designed that captures basic information, like for example the applicant's name, the property location, the land ownership proof, which could be, let's say, the title deed or something like that, that proves that that land belongs to that particular individual. And who can perform this particular task? It's going to be the customer service individual. But also the utility manager can be able to view so that they know what is happening at that particular stage. So we can include the utility manager in this particular stage. So after it goes through that particular phase, that information has been submitted, we go into the application intake stage. And here, this is where now we go ahead to verify the information. Is the form complete? Is the customer contact valid? Is the location provided correct? And who does this? We could have the customer service support do. We could have the customer service support person do this, but also you could have another line manager, just to make sure that you double check the accuracy. You could have, let's say, the utility manager go through this particular stage to verify that the information entered by the customer support is accurate. Yeah. So once this information is all completed and we have verified that all this is right, then we can see that we have a condition that says once all this information is complete, we can proceed to the technical inspection and approval stage. But if we have any of this not complete, we then reject this particular application form. And once we reject it, we move this to the rejection phase, which is at the end of the process. And the manager can be able to write a report, or the manager or the customer person can write a report on why this has been rejected. So that happens at this particular stage, application intake. Now, once that is complete, we transition our workflow into the technical inspection and approval. We have received the call, we've collected the information, we've verified that this person has filled in the right data. We now want to send a technician to the field to go and do an assessment. So when they go there, we designed a mini form that they can be able to fill. They assess the distance to the nearest distribution pipe. If it's within our expansion plan, we can be able to set actually more parameters to this and say, if this is, let's say, 30 meters within our nearest distribution pipeline, we can extend. If it's beyond, we are unable to. So the technician is able to assess that. They assess the feasibility of meter placement. They can estimate the length from the nearest connection joint, and then pressure availability. They take the location, they take some photos, and then fill in more of these details. So like you can see, this is now an action that's going to be done by the field technician, but it can be overseen by the workflow creator or everyone that has been assigned in this particular workflow, but also you could include the utility manager. So you can see that if overall feasibility, the report indicates that this is feasible, we can proceed to the quotation and payment stage. If it's not, we say this is not feasible, and then we write a feasibility report later on at the end and indicate why this was not feasible. So that's how we are transitioning through the stages. So once the technician approves and says this is a feasible extension, then we hand over this to the finance. The finance can now go ahead to do the financial calculations. They estimate how much is required, and then they issue the quotation, and then they notify the customer and send them the quotation, and then they confirm payment once the customer has done the payments. So if the payments have been confirmed, we move from this stage and transition to the installation stage. And if payments are not confirmed and it has taken more than a given number of days that we require, beyond which we reject the application, then it moves to rejection. For instance, in this case, we say that if the payment received is no, then and then the date between the current date and the time the quotation was issued is more than 7 days. It could be 30, it could be 40, depending on the utilities structure. Then you reject that particular application. But then in this case, if the customer approves, we then go on to the installation phase. Now, in the installation phase, this is involving assigning who is going to do this, which is the field technician, the materials, and then the installation completion. So once it goes through this phase, there will be the field technician can be able to say we have completed this particular process, and once that is completed, it now goes to the customer management feature. And here we are going to ask the field technician, whom in many cases we expect them to be trained on the application and the customer management features. So this technician can go ahead and now add this new connection as an asset to the system. They create the asset as a child of the system. Once that is done, they go ahead, log into the system in the app, and then create a customer account, which includes the customer registration details, the account creation details, and we can be able to check this through what we call like a checklist. So that technician can open this form and then check, have you been able to create a customer's name? Have you filled in the customer status, the billing address, the phone numbers, account creation checklist? Have you been able to assign an account number? Have you assigned tariffs? Have you connected this particular customer to the water point using the ID? And then if they have an opening balance, have you been able to enter that? Then the person can record the unique ID of the asset. They can record the customer ID number assigned, and then record the customer account and submit this. So this can be done by either the customer service person or the field technician. But the workflow creator and the utility managers can still be able to view what is happening at this phase. And once that is done, we escalate this to the utility manager, who will now look at the process and go ahead and verify and say, are the meter installed, are the accounts created properly, and the date, and then they sign off. We could add actually a signature question for them to sign off, and I say we have actually been able to get this meter, this service connection to a complete, and then they submit that. So once that is submitted, the next phase is we now conduct the meter reading, and you've been able to set this so that it can happen after a given period of time. So from the time when it has been activated and completely installed, you can set and say 30 days from now, 29 days from now, or 15 days, depending on your billing cycle, we need a meter reading to be done. So you can set that, and once we clock this number of days, it transitions to the meter reading and payment due date. So what happens here is that once the 30 days have exceeded, it's going to transition to the meter reading and payment due date. So what happens here is that now the technician can go to the field and collect the meter reading within the application, and once they're done, they can confirm that they've been able to do that, and then this loops back to the meter reading stage and waits for 30 days before it does that. So our workflow is now going to be circulating around a 30-day period, where we now continuously do a meter reading schedule for that. So that is basically how you would structure your service connection to meter ring workflow. And how does this work in practice? Great. So I want to demonstrate briefly how these interactions would happen in between the different groups. If we look at the how does the customer support individual see or start or even get notifications that they have a task to perform? So how is the interaction between these stages? When the customer support person performs their duty, how does the field technician get to access this information and then perform their particular task? Is the utility manager able to monitor and track whatever is happening within the system using the workflow views? And then what point does the finance officer play their particular roles? So for that particular demonstration, I've created two different accounts that we are going to use for that particular purpose. So we have this customer support individual, whom we are going to assume in this case is on the app. They don't need to do this on the app. They can actually do this on the portal if they are seated at the desk somewhere. But for these illustrations, I'm going to show how the interactions happen between the app and the portal so that you get to get that into details. And then we have the field technician. What are the particular roles they play within that particular system? And then later on, we can see the utility manager. So we created our asset, our workflow. We deployed and said our customer service is going to be this test account, our field technician is going to be the data test, and the finance officer is going to be the same as the customer service individual, and then the utility manager is the creator of this particular workflow. So how does it work in practice? So you, as the workflow creator, you could start it, but I don't want to start it as a workflow creator. I want to start this as, let's say, the customer support individual. So what they do in this case is to synchronize. Very important, because if you don't, usually the information will not be coherent. So after synchronization, this customer support individual can go to the app, and then they will start a new workflow. And our workflow is called the begin service request workflow. And when they start that, the very first step is they are going to enter the new customer connection application details, like for example the name. Now for the purposes of time, I'm not going to fill all this in details, but this is particularly what the customer support individual would be doing. They'll fill in the name, the ID number, the contact, then the address. They'll take the location if they're able to. If they have the GPS coordinates, they can enter the GPS coordinates manually in this position. And then if the landowner has submitted proof, they can be able to upload that as well. And then they can select if it's residential, commercial, etc. And then they submit this form. And the very customer support person has the ability to as well do this double check. But like I said, you can be able to limit this so that somebody else is able to do that. So once they submit that, we notice that it moves to the technical inspection and approval stage. That means this is complete. But they can't perform this particular role, so they have to wait for someone else to do. So this is the notification they get on their ends. And now what happens is if they synchronize, and then in the field, this field technician synchronizes, they are going to get this particular notification on their side that indicates that there is a service connection request workflow that has started, and it's at the technical inspection and approval stage. It's active. You need to start that. So what they're going to do is they're going to open that and then complete the site inspection form. So here they will fill in the distance and more of these details. I'll fill in the most important ones that are compulsory, like this. It's very feasible. Then they can estimate how much it's going to cost. Let's say it's like 200,000, and then they fill in the detailed notes, and then they'll submit this particular form. So once they have submitted, their task is done, and it lets them know that the next stage is financial calculations, issue quotation, customer notification, payment confirmation, which is supposed to be done by the finance individual. But like I mentioned before, I created this deployment such that our finance officer is the same as the customer service individual, so we can still perform that task from the customer support page. So what we have to do is, if this field technician synchronizes and we have the customer support individual as well synchronizing, if they're on the app, when they go back to workflows, they should be able to see that particular workflow. Let me just look at the ID. So here we get the service connection and metering workflow that is active, that is at the stage of quotation and payment. So what they do, they open that, and then they go in and fill the financial calculations. How much would they require? Since I'm in Uganda, I'll use the Ugandan currencies. So they go ahead and fill this information. Let's say the connection fee is about 20,000, and then the installation fee is about 200,000, and then the deposit security is just 100,000. So they will submit that information, and the managers are able to view this. The utility manager is able to view that information, and then they can issue the quotation. They note the date for that quotation issuing, and they'll submit that, and then go ahead to assign an individual to notify the customer. So I can assign the field technician to notify the customer, and then once the payment is done, I can go ahead and confirm that the payment has been done and when the payment happened. Let's say it happened on the 20th. I will submit that. So it goes to the next stage, which is the installation stage, and according to how we designed it, we allow the customer support individual to still be able to assign who can do this installation. So they can go ahead and assign this particular account. So if you have multiple technicians, so you have multiple technicians that you can choose from. But in this case, I have one. I will choose that, and then I will assign that to that particular technician. So then I'll assign this to the same technician. And so it now lets me know that my tasks are done. I'm waiting for the installation report to be submitted from me, from the technician. So when I synchronize, now if you're working from the portal, you don't need to synchronize. But if you're working from the app, it's very important that you synchronize. So when this technician synchronizes on their end, and they move on to the workflows side, they're able to see that their particular workflow, the task, is at installation stage and it's active, and that's what they can perform. So they will go ahead and fill this particular, after they're done the completion of the installation, they will verify that, and then since we allowed them to be able to create accounts, they can go ahead and they can assign, but they can also do it and the same thing can be done by the customer support individual. But within your organization, you can be able to structure it so that some of these responsibilities do not overlap. So it's very streamlined. And this person can go ahead and check that they have been able to perform these particular tasks, which I won't go through all into details, and fill in this particular information and then submit that. Once they're done with the submission, it now goes on to the stage of verification of the account. Now, if I synchronize this, I realize that both the field technician and the customer support individuals cannot do the verification, even if I check their accounts now. And so the verification can only be done by the utility manager. And what the utility manager can do now in this case is, I'll refresh this so that it synchronizes with what has been submitted in the app. So I'll go to the existing workflows, and this is the workflow that I'm working with. So once I open that, it takes me to the verification stage where I can verify this information. I have the chance to look at each of these details and check. And once I confirm that the stage has been gone through extensively, I can go ahead and verify as a utility manager. At this particular point, I state the date when that happened, and then I'll make a submission. So once that is done, it now takes me to immediate meter reading stage. Now this is where the interesting part is, that I could wait for 30 days before I get into the meter reading stage, but in case there is a need for me to do that quickly without waiting for the 30 days, you can see this workflow is going to wait for 30 days until when it goes into the meter reading stage. But I'm able to overlap that by choosing this particular option, and then I give reasons for why I am overlapping this. So what I can do in that case, I'll provide the reason, and then I go ahead and submit that. So once you submit that, it's now going to allow you to do the meter reading process. So I can assign the technician and say, I want this data individual to go and do the meter reading. And then when I go to my app, I can do the meter reading as the utility manager if I want to, if I'm in the field. Oh, one reason as to why someone can do an instant one is probably on the 29th day they're in the field and they can be able to do that. They don't need to wait for the next day. They may not be there. So they want to do it instantly, then they can activate that. The manager is doing a site visit and decides to do that. But normally, the field officers would be the one to do that. So the manager can go ahead and do the meter reading instantly, but I want it to be done by, let's say, my field officer. So what the field officer has to do is basically to synchronize on their ends. Once they completely synchronize and they go to their workflows, and they'll see that there is the meter reading and payment due state. This is the stage at which their workflow is, and they can now go ahead and do the meter reading within the system, and then they confirm and make a submission, and then the system loops back and wait for the next 30 days. So that's how the system has been now designed for you to be able to start from when your customers ask for a request to when you actually do your first meter reading, and then subsequently continue to do more meter reading sessions. So at the end of it all, you'll have a dashboard. You have this interface, the workflow interface, where you can monitor and see this particular workflow. The payments were made, the customer name is Lego, payments were made, installations completed, but it's still in active state because we are waiting for the meter reading and payment cycle that's going to happen. And currently it's the technician that is responsible and in charge of completing that particular task. And you can use each of these as a data source in your visualizations and dashboard.